So I've been doing a series of posts on the blog digital.photorecommendations.com all about lenses. I've covered focal length and aperture so far, and I thought I would do this next post as a video post and answer one of the most common questions I get, and that is, why should I buy this lens? And this lens being, whichever one you all are currently looking at. A lot of questions. How does it compare to some other lens? Why is this lens twice as much as some other lens? So I got a couple of lenses here, and I've got them paired up, and we're going to talk about them a little bit. And even though I shoot Canon, these are all Canon with the exception of one Sigma lens here. Everything I'm going to talk about is applicable and Nikon, Pentax across the board. So let's start with our first two lenses that we're going to talk about. So on the left, we have Canon's kit lens. This is the lens that comes with all of their Rebel DSLR cameras, and it's a decent lens, and for the most part I recommend that people do get it with when they buy the DSLR. It only adds about $100 to the total price. The last couple of years it's included image stabilization, which is a nice feature, and we can talk a little bit more about how that's helpful. But it's very light, it has a fairly cheap feel, and the zoom as you go from 18 to 24 is not so smooth, a little sticky in places, and autofocus, you got to switch to manual focus to be able to focus, and you can notice that the focus ring is quite small out there at the end. Some more statistics about this lens. As I said, it is 18 to 55. It's also EFS, which means that it will not work on a full frame sensor. Here's our aperture, 3.5 to 5.6, so it's a variable aperture, which if you read my aperture post, means that at 18 you can shoot wide open at 3.5, but as you zoom to 55, your maximum aperture decreases to 5.6. And if you don't know why I'm using the term decreases, again, you need to go read my aperture post because they're fractions. One other statistic about this is that it's a 58 millimeter lens for filters at the end. And a lot of time I get questions of what filters I should buy. I have a post about that too. But in general, I recommend that you really don't put any filter on the end of a lens unless it's a circular polarizer. If you haven't bought the lens yet and you want to know what filter size you need, a quick way to check is look it up on Amazon and look at what filters they're bundling down beneath, and those sizes are the ones. You can also find it in the statistics or the stats of the lens, but usually it's a little bit more buried. So on the right here, we have a Sigma, which is the exact same range, actually minus 50, so it's 18 to 50. It's a heavier, more solid lens, and it does cost more. And you can see here that it has a maximum aperture of 2.8, and that's a constant maximum aperture. And so what that means is as you zoom from 18 to 50, you can stay at 2.8 for the maximum aperture. And I'll also point out that not only did I say it's heavier, but the zoom is very smooth from 18 to 55. So yes, this is a more expensive lens, but it gives you better results in low light because of the constant maximum aperture. It has a larger, nicer manual focus ring. If I switch to manual, you can see that very nice and smooth. It's much larger than the little ring on the Canon. And if we pop off the end here, you can see that it's just larger glass in general, and it's 67. So a downside of this lens is it's heavier. It requires a bigger filter, which are a little bit more expensive if you want to put that on there. But as I said, it's going to give you better quality and low light. It also doesn't have image stabilization, which I'll do a post soon about that. Image stabilization is nice, but it's not the end-all be-all, and in some situations it's not helpful at all. So there's our two kit lenses, or our two kit lens range. Now let's talk about two primes. These both happen to be 50 millimeters, and they are both Canon. So you say, well, why are they different sizes if they're the exact same millimeter? So on my left is the Nifty 50, or the 50 1.8. And so this has a maximum aperture of 1.8, and because it's a prime lens, it doesn't zoom. And this is a lens that I think everybody should own for at least part of their life of shooting with their camera. And Nikon has a 51.82. It's a great lens for really seeing how changing your aperture changes your depth of field and having control over that, and of experiencing what it's like to shoot with a lens that does well in low light, because you can go all the way to 1.8, which is a very large aperture. The downsides of this lens is, it's got a tiny focus ring, and it's a very cheap build. And in fact, I'll tell you a quick story that I thought this lens was broken for quite a while. It wasn't autofocusing at a distance, and it turned out that it was just a little cockeyed, and I just put a little pressure on here and it popped back together, and that seems to be working fine. But I mean, it's cheap, but it costs $100, and as I said, it's an excellent example of working with a lens that does well in low light. So why would someone pay about $300 more for the same focal length? And the answer is, for the most part, right here. So this is an f1.4. It has a 1.4 constant aperture. That's part of the answer. So it's even better in low light. The rest of the answer is, this is the first lens we're looking at that has the ultrasonic motor. USM, you'll see that abbreviated sometimes, means that the focus is much faster and much quieter than the 50. When this 50 is trying to focus, you can really hear it. And so, something else that we haven't really talked about is using these on video DSLRs. You really don't want to use the autofocus while you're filming with the nifty 50 here. You're going to really hear that grinding as it goes back and forth in search of focus. Your ultrasonic is going to be much faster, much quieter, and this is also the first lens that we're looking at that has full-time manual focus. So that means even when you're in autofocus and you have the camera focus for you, you can do a quick adjustment by grabbing this barrel. And again, see the difference in size of the focus ring. We got a nice big rubber ring to grab right there. Again, on the nifty 50 here, it's this smallish kind of outer bezel, and that's about it. Bigger filter size as well. This one, it's not printed anywhere on the camera, so another tip I have for you all is look in the back of the lens cap. I think that's probably too hard for you to read there, but printed on the underside of the lens cap, it tells me that that's a 58. So a 58. So there's our two primes. Now let's talk about two telephoto lenses. The price difference between these two is huge, gigantic. So let's talk about this one first. This is kind of your consumer grade 70 to 300, very nice. It has image stabilization. It's an f4 to 5.6, so not a constant aperture. As you zoom from 70 to 300, your maximum aperture is going to decrease there to 5.6. It does have two stabilizer modes. One is your normal, two is if you are panning, so if you're trying to capture sports and things of that sort, that can give you a little bit of help, and you can turn your stabilizer on and off. Stabilizer is, as I said, I'll do a post about it, pretty amazing. It does decrease your battery life though, because what you have going on inside this lens is some gyroscopic action that is basically decreasing your camera shake. Very nice lens, very nice range on a crop sensor. The 300 gets you quite close. If you're starting out in wildlife shooting and things of that sort, it's great. It's a great lens. And let's look now and compare it to this behemoth though. This lens weighs about as much as all of the lenses on the table combined. It's a 70 to 200, and this is the first lens we're looking at here on the table that is an L class lens, which is Canon's professional level lens. As I said, it's a 70 to 200. It's got the little L printed in red. The little red line lets you know that it's L2 and that you're special if you own it. And it's, as I said, it's a constant aperture of 2.8. So that's quite amazing. From 70 all the way up to 200, it can maintain that constant aperture. And as I said, this thing is, I think it's somewhere around $2,000. And why would someone pay that much for it? This one is about a third of that price. And the answer again is this 2.8. So wedding photographers love, love, love this lens because you can get really close to the action without being in their face, and you have this constant aperture of 2.8, which lets you do well in low light situations, which wedding photographers often find themselves in. It's got the same, it's got stabilizer, it's got the 2 different stabilizer modes. 77 is its filter size, and this little funny thing here is a tripod mount. Because it's so heavy, it's very likely to weigh more than the camera, or at least the same, and it's easier to put the tripod onto the lens and a little less stress on the lens mount at the end there. So I hope that cleared up at least a little confusion about why some lenses that seem very similar might cost a good deal more than another lens. And if you have questions, you can find me on Twitter @CameraRec, or visit my blog digital.photorecommendations.com, and I'll have some more video posts coming soon. Thank you.